Hi, welcome back to the second part of our movie here. I want to be specific about that so you're sure that you actually haven't missed anything and that this is the second half. What I'm going to show you now for using commands on the command line is something called keyboard shortcuts. The first keyboard shortcut I'm going to show you is using the tab key to do something called tab completion. Now, if you've used Linux before, you're already familiar with tab completion. What the tab key does is, after a command, you give it a few characters of either a directory name or your file name, and then press the tab key, and it gives you a complete name. And pressing the tab key repeatedly will give you any other files that start out with the characters you gave it. So for instance, I'm going to start with a command here you haven't seen yet. It's called more. And what more does is it allows you to view the contents of a text file. And in this case, what I'm going to be doing is the files I'm going to be using, a couple of them are text files, one isn't. But there's three files that I'll be able to demonstrate using tab completion so that you can see how it works. So I'm going to type more, space, followed by the letter T. Now, when I press tab, what it does is it shows me the first item it found. In this case, there's a directory there called templates. It's a directory, so more won't work on it. One thing I should comment on is a tab completion will show you the directory name or file name that completes the characters you've typed in. They don't do any kind of filtering based on the command you've typed in. So you have to do your own filtering and understand what commands will work with what names come back. So if I press tab again, it gives me test.xlsx. Now, later on in part 2, we'll find out that this is a Microsoft Excel file. And more, although it'll try to display that, there'll be so many control codes and formatting codes inside the file, it's almost impossible to see any text that might be in there. So this is not a good candidate to actually use the more command with. But a file called testcopy.bat is a script file, so that's a text file. And if I press tab again, there's something called testdir, which I'm actually not sure what that might be. I'd have to double check. And when we hit tab again, it goes back up to templates. So there's actually 4 things that start with T. And if you want to reduce the amount of things that come back, you can type as many characters as you remember a file contains. Now, the characters you type in need to be at the beginning of the file name in order for tab completion to work. So test, if I type in that whole word, what it'll do is it'll come back with all the files that actually start with the characters T-E-S-T. And if I look at test copy bat, and if that's the one I want, then all I need to do is press enter, and more will simply display what the contents of that is. Now in this case, there's only one line there that's inside the file. But that gives you an idea about how tab completion works. Now, couple of things I should point out. I already talked about if you type in and you use tab, let me do this, that it cycles around so that if you go by the one file you wanted to use, you could always cycle around and get it again. But if you only go by it like one time, like I did here, I went by testcopy.bat to tester, you can hold down the shift key and press tab while you're holding down the shift key, and tab will fill in the file names backwards then, instead of alphabetically forwards, it'll fill in alphabetically backwards from Z to A instead of A to Z. So I just wanted to remember to tell you that. Now, the other, or not just the other, but another shortcut key is using the up arrow. So far I've talked about the command history, but I haven't really demonstrated on how you get the commands back in order to use them again. To do that, you use the up arrow. That will take you back and show you the previous commands that you've used. And you can keep going as many times as you want. Now, date in capitals is the last one I've got there for this session. So we can go backwards. Now, what you were seeing me do, and I'm sorry I didn't explain it, if you go backwards, you can also go forwards using the down arrow. All right? Now, one thing you need to be aware of is, let's say help dir is the command I wanted. So I can simply get that by going backwards or forwards with the arrow keys, hit enter, and it executes that command. Now, what you need to be aware of is now since I've used the help dir command, when I use the up arrow key again, it doesn't start with the last command used before you use the help dir command again. It goes back to the previous command that you used before help dir was listed in the command history. And the same holds true for the down arrow. If you hit the down arrow, it just simply shows you all the commands that were executed after the command you just selected. So that's a bit of something to get used to. Again, if you're a Linux user, that's not the way going through the command history works on the Linux system, but something you have to get used to on Windows. Now, what happens if all you want to do is recall the last command you used so you can edit it, so you can change it? Well, you can use the F3 key, and it just simply recalls the last command you used. Now, it doesn't cycle through, but it does bring up the last command you used, doesn't run it, and then you can simply edit the actual last command used. Now, this is nice that you can use the arrow keys to go up and down, but it's a little bit easier sometimes if you can get a list of all the commands so that you can cycle through and just so you can visually see everything. Well, F7 does that. When you press F7, you get a little window that pops up, and here's one of the pop-up windows that I talked about in the properties for colors. So this is showing a white background with kind of a purple text. And once you have this window up, you simply use the arrow keys to go to the one you want. So you don't have to kind of like stare at the screen as you hit the down arrow or you hit the the up arrow. You can see where the command is, at least for a few of them. And then it's a little bit sometimes easier to actually execute that command. So if I want to run the date/t command again, I use the arrow keys to highlight it, and then I just hit enter and it executes. Now, another keyboard shortcut is the F8 key. Now what that does for you is it literally will cycle backwards through previously used commands. Now, how is this different than just using the up arrow? I should note is you can't go forward, so you have to keep going backwards. One of the nice things about the F8 key is you can edit the command. Let's say I have dir here, and I'll delete the rest of this. And you hit the F8 key for dir, and it cycles only through the characters you've typed in. So if what you want to cycle through is just all the dir commands you've used, you type in dir and then use F8, and it shows you just those commands in the command history. So that makes it a little bit easier to kind of cycle through. If you know, I used a dir command here that had the right switches I want, now where is it? You can do like dir and then cycle through and find the command that you want to use. Alright, now not really a keyboard shortcut. There is a way to execute command line commands one time without necessarily leaving a command line window open or opening a command line window first. Those keyboard shortcuts are the Win key plus the R key. R is in red. When you do that, you get a Run dialog box that'll pop up. Usually it shows up in the lower left corner of your screen. And right here I've got a command that I was using before. And let me click so it's not highlighted, hopefully a little bit easier to read. I can't make the window bigger, so hopefully you'll be able to read this in the video. Excuse me. Now, these commands that you can run have always the same format. They start off with the word CMD. Now what this is doing is you're actually invoking a command line environment, cmd.exe, which is a program. Then you have an option. In this case it says /c. That determines whether it's going to leave the command line window open after the command has executed. Then within double quote marks you have the command you want to execute. Doesn't matter what kind of command you have or if it has any switches or not, it always has to be in double quotes. Now the rest of this command is just using some techniques that the output is going to get put into a text file for me. The reason for that is this /c switch. What that is that says execute the command and then close the window after it's done executing. Now the alternative to /c is /k. /k says execute the command and leave the window open. Now, in order to do this, you have to use one or the others, either /k or /c. You can't leave that off. So now, if I run this, which I'm going to do in a second, I can either hit enter or I can click OK. So I'm going to click OK. What it does is it says access is denied. Now what the problem here is, when a window gets left open, it's going to be left open in the system32 directory where the command.exe program actually resides. And since this is going to get opened in user mode, you don't have any permissions to create a file there. So what you would need to do is alter the run command so the file gets put elsewhere. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're not going to talk about putting things in different directories until part 3 when we talk about directories. So let me close this window and I'll modify the run command so that first off, it's not going to create a file with the output, but it is going to leave the window open. All right. So I now have cmd/k, leave the window open, just get me a directory of the C root drive in this case. And again, we'll talk about how you specify that when we talk about Part 3 directories. So I'm going to click OK, and the window opens up, stays open. Let me move this down about the middle, and I now have a directory listing all the items in the root directory of C. Now, the window that gets open is using the default properties for the window. So you don't get the white background with black text, you don't get the larger text size, but you do have a window, you do have the command executed. Now what I'm going to do is close this. We're going to do run one last time. And this time I'm going to change /k to /c. And this time what it'll do is it'll run, but the window won't remain open. So I'll click OK, and you saw that the command line window opened briefly and went away. Now getting a directory listing of items and then having the window closed so you can't see that list of items doesn't make any sense, of course. But I wanted to do that just to demonstrate how that would all work. Normally for something like that, I would have created a file that contained the output like I did with the very first time I ran that command. But I would have to remember to specify a different location for the file. And we'll get into all that in Part 3 about how you specify different locations on the command line. Now, one last thing. CMD has several different switches. So what I'm going to do is type help CMD just to show you. And there's a lot of different switches. There's more than just C and K, but you have to specify at least one of these switches for the command to work properly. Now, this is one of the help information packets, or groups, I guess, where you'll notice that it does give you the help information one screen full at a time. And it says press any key to continue, and you can just hit the enter key and it will display another full screen. Now, this particular help group has several screens. So one of the things I didn't talk about earlier was, okay, if you're getting screenfuls of information, what do you do if you read what you want to read and you just want to stop getting all the help information? You do that by holding down Control and the C key, and that quits the help program and gets you back to your command line prompt. Alright, so that's really it for the keyboard shortcuts. What we're going to do now is I'm going to show you a few of the commands that you can use that are kind of miscellaneous commands. And in Part 2 we'll talk about commands that have to do with using files. Now, already talked a little bit. Did I talk about this command? I'm not sure that I talked about title already. I know I talked about date and time. But command title allows you to literally change the name up here in the title bar of the window. So if I type title, Mark Miller, it changes the name. Now, title doesn't have any switches, and if I do help title, this is all it says. String specifies the title for the command prompt window. Now remember, when you type in a command, then you have to have a space, and now everything after this space will become the title. So if I forget and just keep typing, and maybe I didn't want everything, I made a typo or something, you'll notice everything you type after that command now becomes the title of the window. So I just wanted to let you know, be a little bit careful that all text after that will become a title. All right. Now I had talked to you earlier that there's a command to change your color of your window. And that command is simply color. Now I'm going to bring up the help for this. And that gives you all the different colors you can use to change the background and the text color for the window. Now, I'm probably repeating myself, but remember that when you change the color of your window, text, and background using the properties, it remembers those colors the next time you open up the window. The color command change is not remembered, okay? Just to warn you. Now, the first number you give it is always for the background. The second number you give the command is for the text color. And what you're doing is you're using hexadecimal numbers. That's why it goes from 0 to 9 and then A through F right here. So if I want to make my background white, not bright white, but just white, I would say color F, and then, oops, not F, sorry, 7. And then if I wanted to have my text be blue, I could have the number 1. So what this is saying, remember the first number is for the background, second number is for the text color. So I'm going to have a white background with blue letters. So let's see what happens. Now white kind of looks like a gray, doesn't it? That's why a lot of times people will set the background to bright white instead of just white. And in fact, the background color and text colors you'll see really depend on the monitor you're using, how the monitor renders those colors. But I want to go back to my nice bright white background and black text. So F0. And there we go. That's kind of weird. Maybe it's the color change. The colors don't look as dark, but now they're coming in. I see them starting to get darker as I talk here. So that's good. All right. So another reminder that the window properties does give you more color options, but those block colors you saw, that all you had to do is click on a particular color, those are the same as these colors here. All right. We talked about date. We talked about time. One thing to remember about changing time is that you need to change the time using a 24-hour clock. So let me bring up an administrator window for the time. I'm sorry, an administrator window so that I can change the time because you can't change it in user mode. Now, by 24-hour clock, I mean 1 a.m. is 1:00, but 1 p.m. is 13:00. So if I say time 1:00, and you don't need to put leading zeros, it will now change the time to be 1 a.m. in the morning, and if I type time/t, it shows you that it's now 1 a.m. Now, if I want to change it to 1 p.m., 13:00 hours and 0 minutes, and I do time/t, it's now 1 p.m. Now remember, I thought I talked about this in the first half, but in case I didn't, I apologize. Time has the same switch as date does, where if all you want to do is list the time, you have to use the /t switch to simply list the time. And then, just like the date, you can specify the time along with the command so that it will change the time for you. So just remember, you start adding on hours after 12, which is noon. So 1 p.m. would be 13, 2 p.m. would be 14, and so on. So 8 p.m. would be 8 plus 12, which is 16. Okay? Now, so far, been doing a lot of commands. What happens if you want to change a command? I'm sorry. If you want to use a command and you want to get rid of all the stuff you've already typed in so that you can have like a clean slate, so to speak. Now, one way to do it would be to simply scroll down if you wanted to. You can also clear the screen, which not only gets rid of everything you see currently, but deletes everything in your screen buffer so you can't scroll back. So if I do CLS, which is the command for clear screen on Windows, hit enter, notice my scroll bar. Can't go back any further. Now your command history is still there, but none of the results of using those commands are there. They're all gone. So better to scroll down to have a clean screen or use CLS. Kind of depends on the situation. That's one of the things you have to play with to see which works better for you. Now, to close Windows, all you need to do is click the X and you're done. But let's say you don't have a Windows GUI, a graphical user interface. You can close the window out simply by typing EXIT. Exit. XIT. Done. Now you will notice that down here in the lower right, the time didn't get really changed, even though the command line thinks it did. So let's see what happened here. Time /t, 9:41 p.m. This may or may not completely work. The reason for that is most of the times your computers are set to phone home to an internet time server so that they're always keeping themselves up to date. So even if you change the date and time using the command line on your desktop computers, they're going to get reset after they connect home. Sorry, not phone home, but connect to the internet date and time server. So these commands, date and time, are really only useful if you're working on a server that's not connected to the internet to change the date and time for whatever reason. All right. Now, I had talked about earlier about the prompt. So here's the prompt, C:, and then my home directory, users, Mark, Monica. There's actually several parts to this. The first part is the drive letter, which usually always has a colon after it. Second part is the actual directory structure, /users, /Mark, Monica. And then the greater than sign is used simply as a separator between the prompt, or I'm sorry, between the rest of the information and where you're going to type in the commands. The separator here could just as easily be a space instead of a greater than sign. If you actually want to change how the prompt looks, you simply type in the command prompt and then specify how you want the prompt to be. And I'm going to type in the help to show you that there's a lot of options for changing how you want the prompt to look. Now, Several of these are specifying characters that you cannot type in manually. You can type in some text on the prompt command without using these commands, but there isn't a lot of text that you can do that to. So it's better simply to use these codes. All right, so let's say I want to have the current date followed by an equal sign, just to change it. Prompt. So the first thing I want is a date. So if I type $D, and just because, again, like everything, just because these letters are in uppercase doesn't mean you have to type them that way. So $D is my current date, and then $Q is an equal sign. And so instead of a greater than on the prompt, I now have an equal sign separating the rest of the information from actually typing in the commands. And when you specify the current date, it gives you the day as well. Now, the date is one of the things that you can type in manually, but if you use this code, it will always update to the current date so that you don't have to type in. And typing in a $D is a lot quicker than typing in a date like this. Now, could you type in the date? As I said before, yes, you could. But that means if you're leaving your command prompt open over past midnight, let's say, that means it won't show the current date anymore. It'll show the previous day's date. So there's no real good reason to manually type in a date there. You should, like I said, you should always use the code. Now there are other options here for getting really complicated on how you create your prompt, but I am not going to go into those for this class. Just know that you can do some more complicated things for your prompt if you really, really need to. Most of the time the codes listed here serve pretty much everything you're going to want to do. All right. That gets us to the end of the video for both parts for using the command line. Thanks for watching. I hope this proved useful for you, and I hope it helps you understand the command line. Again, if you don't understand something either in the PowerPoint or in these videos, please email me. I will get back to you just as soon as I can. All right, thank you. We're done for now.